Located in the northern Marianas, Tinian sits about 1,500 miles from the Japanese mainland, roughly 100 miles north of Guam and 3 miles southwest of Saipan. Through much of its history, Spain and Germany controlled this 39-square-mile tropical, while Japan took it over in 1914 for agricultural use and, as the war progressed, began to strengthen its defenses when planners realized the island could serve as an American-targeted base for the long-range Boeing B29 super fortress bombers. Today, Tinian is probably best known as the launching point for the American atomic strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in July 1944, it was one more stepping stone in the island campaign toward Japan. As the assault on Saipan unfolded, Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, commander of the Expeditionary Forces, turned his attention to taking Tinian. With some 9,000 Japanese troops garrisoned there, Smith believed the operation had the makings of the Pacific War's most flawless amphibious assault, yet it quickly touched off fierce disagreement. Senior American commanders argued bitterly and at length over which beaches should be used for the landings. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, known to some as Terrible Turner, favored a landing on the northeastern shore at Yellow Beach. Opposing him were Major General Harry Schmidt, who commanded the Northern Troops and Landing Force, and Rear Admiral Harry W. Hill, leader of the Northern Attack Force. They pushed instead for two less defended spots at the island's northern tip called White 1 and White 2, each under 200 yards across. Amphibious doctrine held that a division-scale landing required a beach roughly 1,000 yards wide, but planners calculated White 1 could take 8 amphibious tractors at once, while White 2 might handle 16. Tempers flared, and, at one point, Admiral Hill and Turner stormed out of a meeting. Smith later recalled that the session aboard the USS Rocky Mount erupted in language unfit for print and set the stage for a confrontation. Turner thundered that Smith would not be put ashore on the white beaches. Smith shot back that Turner would land his men wherever Smith ordered and that it was Smith's responsibility to write the plans and Turner's only job to tell him whether the landing could be executed. Turner insisted it was impossible to put 2 divisions ashore on those narrow beaches and that the only feasible site was Tinian Town. Smith countered that landing there would invite another Tarawa and cost many lives. The argument dragged on for hours as each tried to persuade the other. When Smith warned that reconnaissance would settle the matter, Turner derided the recon Marines as inexperienced and scoffed at their ability to judge the terrain. Smith threatened to appeal the issue to Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, and, if necessary, to Admiral Chester W. Nimitz. Hill later wrote that he had never seen Turner so bitter and difficult as he was that day. Eventually, Smith won agreement to delay any final decision until the reconnaissance reports were in. Afterward, Turner would describe Holland Smith as a fine tactical commander and a trusted friend, though Smith himself remained blunt in his assessment of Turner, a hard-driven naval officer who knew little of land warfare and pushed relentlessly, hence the nickname Terrible Turner. The question of where to land was left to the Amphibious Reconnaissance Unit, commanded by Captain James L. Jones, father of the future Commandant General. James L. Jones, Jr. The unit had been formed in January 1943 at Camp Elliott, California, renamed Amphibious Reconnaissance Company, the 5th Amphibious Corps, Pacific Fleet, in August 1943, and on April 14, 1944, was expanded into a 2-company battalion at Smith's request and designated the V. Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion, under Major James L. Jones. Tasked with a nighttime reconnaissance of Tinian's beaches, the battalion operated alongside underwater demolition teams UDTs 5 and 7 with several clear objectives. Identify what landing craft each beach could accept. Determine what vehicles could cross the reef and proceed inland. Measure cliff heights and examine the vegetation behind the shorelines. Check water depths and reef formations and judge whether infantry could scale any cliffs without cargo nets or ladders. Captain Merwin H. Silverthorne's Company A, together with Frogman from UDT-7, was assigned to Yellow Beach, while Company B, under Lieutenant Leo B. Shin, accompanied by a dozen swimmers from UDT-5, led by Lieutenant Commander Draper L. Kaufman, took responsibility for the 2 white beaches. On July 8, the battalion leaders and selected NCOs boarded the USS Gilmer APD-11, a converted World War I destroyer transport, and steamed around Tinian's west coast. Shin later recalled the trip was intended to let them view the beaches through binoculars and learn the island's horizontal silhouette so navigation during the actual reconnaissance would be easier. The following evening, both recon companies rehearsed off the beaches in Magician Bay, Saipan, with swimmers from UDT-7. It was agreed the UDTs would perform the hydrographic work while the Marines would examine the terrain and collect detailed beach information. At midnight, the APD launched 10 black neoprene LCRs about 3,000 yards offshore, then towed them to a position 1,500 yards out. Before the swimmers paddled the boats to within 500 yards of the shore and entered the water, Each swimmer carried a torch, an inflatable CO lifebelt, and a packet of aviator's yellow emergency dye. The rehearsal went as planned and wrapped up around 500. July 10th was set for the real reconnaissance. That day was consumed by planning, briefings, debarkation drills, and final checks. Every available aerial photograph and map of the beaches was combed over. The Recon Marines and frogmen were to be brought by USS Gilmer and USS Stringham, APD-6, to a rendezvous roughly 3,000 yards offshore, from where they would board 10-man rubber boats. Those boats would be towed to about 500 yards off each designated beach by landing craft with muffled exhausts and then paddled to positions just beyond the surf. To preserve secrecy and avoid warning the Japanese. Strict orders forbade disturbing any mines or obstacles found. For Yellow Beach, Captain Silverthorne selected 8 swimmers from Lieutenant Richard F. Burks's UDT-7 and 20 men from Company A. They put off at about 10:45 p.m. under a moon hidden by clouds. Major Jones reported that when the rubber boats were roughly 500 yards out, 2 sharp reports like rifle shots accompanied by flashes were heard off the south end of the main Yellow Beach. Jones, ordered to remain covert, directed the boats north to gather hydrographic data from the reef, and the noises were followed by 2 dull bangs resembling mortar fire. UDT-7 discovered underwater boulders and potholes, and even floating mines in the approaches, and the swimmers found the beach flanked by nearly impassable cliffs, some 20 to 25 feet high along a stretch of roughly 125 yards. Under Second List Donald F. Neff's command, the Marines found the Japanese had strung double-apron barbed wire right across the beach. Armed only with a knife, Neff left his men at the high water mark and crawled about 30 yards inland through the wire to look for possible exits. As he moved, he could hear Japanese laborers at work nearby, and at one point saw 3 Japanese sentries watching the shoreline from a cliff. Although headlights were flashed toward the shore from time to time, the sentries failed to identify the Marine officer. Neff discovered that the Japanese were building defensive works immediately in front of the intended landing site, then returned to his men and swam back to the rubber boat after a harrowing time ashore. He was later awarded the Silver Star for leading Company A's reconnaissance that night. The survey showed Yellow Beach had heavy surf and was unsuitable for a mass landing because of steep cliffs and narrow exits. The Task Force 52 commander reported commanders agreed the assault would be limited to White Beaches 1 and 2. White Beach 1, the northernmost, led Shin to split his company into 2 detachments, one assigned to each beach. As a lieutenant, Russell E. Corey later recalled the beaches measured roughly 60 and 160 yards and were separated by about 1,000 yards of rough coastline. The 2 Marine units left the Gilmer around 11:30 p.m. Debarkation went smoothly until the LCRs were cut loose, when a strong tidal current carried both teams about 800 yards north of Tinian. The White Beach 1 party struck a coral ledge and could not make the shore. Had it not been for that outcrop, they would have been carried farther into the Saipan Channel. The White Beach 2 team managed to land and quickly reconnoiter the beach and its flanks. UDT swimmers checked the offshore approaches and found nothing to block a landing. Lieutenant J.G. Doors Surland led a squad of frogmen onto the beach above the high water mark to investigate, reported. Minespot found no explosives. Finding the rubber boats for pickup proved exceptionally difficult because of the northerly current, low scudding clouds, and a light fog. Sergeant Sam Lanford, PFC Gunnery, Lou, Commander Kaufman, the UDT leader, and John Saburn missed the recovery and were swept into the channel separating Tinian from Saipan. After several hours treading water, they were rescued by the picket boat, USS Dickerson, APD-21. Their inflatable flotation bladders kept them alive. With only half the reconnaissance completed, Jones ordered Silverthorne's Company A back to reconnoiter White Beach to the next evening. The new plan called for putting the men ashore from USS Stringham and recovering them on USS Gilmer, with 1 dummy rubber boat fitted with a wire mesh tripod to act as a radar reflector and 5 manned rubber boats towing paddlers and swimmers to a point about 1,900 yards off White Beach. 2. Jones believed the first night's failure had been due to the Gilmer's lack of surface radar to guide the boats. Silverthorne supplied 6 2-man swimmer teams each, an officer paired with a senior NCO, while Company B furnished boats and crews. 12 UDT swimmers accompanied them, launched from 1,900 yards and guided by ship radio. The boats were directed to a spot roughly 400 yards offshore and 100 yards south of White Beach 2, protected by steel helmets in the LCRs and the wire mesh tripod. The swimmer teams slipped into the sea using side and breaststrokes to avoid splashing. Faces and necks were camouflaged so only heads showed above water, making them nearly invisible. A number of men suffered cuts from sharp coral, but the teams crossed the reef in deep water, undetected. Once ashore, the Recon Marines reported the beach clear of obstructions and saw no signs of enemy activity. UDTs inspected the ocean and reef while the Marines examined the shoreline. To recon men lay exposed on the sand while a Japanese guard almost walked right over them without noticing. The surf, reef, beach, and flanks were thoroughly checked. The teams completed their tasks and returned to the recovery ships on schedule. Silverthorne briefed Rear Admiral Hill. The beaches were narrow but free of mines, coral heads, boulders, wire, boat obstacles, and offshore reefs, as level as a pool table. Hill was convinced, and Silverthorne received the Silver Star. The landing force operations officer later praised the near-perfect execution, crediting both the reconnaissance battalion and the UDTs. After Vice Admiral Turner's stubborn refusal was finally set aside, Admiral Spruance took responsibility for the beach decision and called a meeting of the senior commanders on the afternoon of July 12. Rear Admiral Hill and Lieutenant General Smith presented a persuasive case for the white beaches. At the end, Turner said calmly that he would accept the plan. Hill later recalled the collective relief when the decision was reached. Turner explained he had wanted every possible landing site thoroughly examined before committing and had therefore delayed final approval until after the recon. With that settled, the assault went in. By mid-afternoon, on July 24th, Major General Clifton's 4th Marine Division had come ashore over the White Beaches with light losses, and the 2nd Marine Division followed the next day. Both divisions had suffered heavily on Saipan and were not eager for another brutal fight over the previous 18 months. The 2nd Division had taken severe casualties at Guadalcanal and endured thousands of malaria cases, and later suffered grievous losses at Tarawa and Saipan. The 4th Division, though newer, had already been bloodied earlier in 1944 and had taken heavy casualties at Saipan, reducing its average battalion strength from about 880 men to roughly 565, more than a 35% drop. Nonetheless, Major Carl W. Hoffman later wrote that morale for the Tinian operation was generally high. After a punishing 25-day campaign and only a short 2-day pause, the Marines faced the next assault with a weary, "Here we go again," rather than outright complaint. Turner noted that Lieutenant General Holland Smith was replaced as commander of the 5th Amphibious Corps by Major General Harry Schmidt, who promised to finish the job in 10 days. An estimate proven conservative when the island was secured in 9. Rear Admiral Hill divided Tinian into 5 fire support sectors and ordered heavy naval bombardments at each to soften defenses, ease the Marines ashore, and to mislead the Japanese about the invasion points. Tinian town took the heaviest punishment. Cruisers Cleveland and Louisville, 7 destroyers, and the battleships Colorado, Tennessee, and California supplied the fire. In Colorado's 16-inch guns knocked out to 6-inch coastal batteries at San Hilo Point that might otherwise have threatened the White Beaches. Landings. Japanese batteries answered by firing 22 rounds at the Colorado, a barrage that killed 43 sailors and wounded 198 more. The Tennessee later joined in to finish suppressing the coastal defenses. On Jig Day, Tinian's equivalent of DETA naval gunfire was paused 3 times so American aircraft could strike Tinian town. The beaches, rail junctions, pillboxes, gun positions, and roads. More than 350 Army and Navy planes took part, delivering 34 napalm strikes, about 200 rockets, 42 incendiary clusters, and some 500 bombs. The 4th Marine Division assembled aboard 37 LSTs, anchored off Saipan, and after the preliminary bombardment was resupplied with 3 days. Rations, water, medical stores, and ammunition. Vehicles and gear were loaded beginning July 15th. Planners intended the assault troops to travel light, no full packs. Only a spoon, a pair of socks, insect repellent, and emergency items in their pockets. The assault went in on July 24th, Jig Day, with companies, platoons, and squads landing in column because the beaches were too narrow to put battalions ashore abreast. To fix Japanese forces around Tinian town, Watson's 2nd Marine Division staged a diversionary feint launched in 2 LCVPs that pinned a battalion of the Japanese 50th Infantry Regiment and elements of the 56th Naval Guard Force in place, convinced they had repulsed an invasion. Colonel Q.A. Ogata radioed Tokyo claiming his troops had beaten off 100 landing barges, while Ogata held his ground. The main assault unfolded. The 25th Marines came ashore at White Beach 2 and the 24th Marines at White Beach 1 in roughly 24 LVTs. The entire 2nd Battalion of the 24th was ashore. By about 8:20 a.m. and despite scattered rifle and machine gun fire during the roughly 26-minute run across open water, the craft reached the shore. A few defenders who sheltered in caves and rock crevices at White Beach 1 were quickly wiped out. Within an hour, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 24th were ashore and pushing inland. By 4 p.m., the 2nd Battalion had reached the western edge of Airfield No. 3 and severed the main road linking Airfield No. 1 to the east coast and southern Tinian, despite intermittent artillery, mortar, and small arms fire. The 1st Battalion ran into stiffer resistance from enemy positions in caves too. Its left flamethrower tanks were called up, but the Japanese stubbornly resisted, and the 24th TH's 3rd battalion in reserve was committed to close a gap between the lead units. At White Beach to the 25th Marines struck a dense, previously undetected minefield. 3 LVTs and a jeep were blown up, and it took about 6 hours to clear the mines. Defenders had also booby-trapped beer cases and souvenir items to maim or kill unsuspecting Marines. Advancing troops encountered parts of the Japanese 50th Regiment entrenched in caves, pillboxes, and ravines. Those defenders fired mortars, machine guns, and anti-tank, anti-boat weapons, and the assaulting Marines elected to bypass some positions and leave them to later waves. Artillery from Mount Lasso, roughly 2.5 miles away, where Ogata's headquarters were sighted, added harassing fire. The commander of the 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, described the usual chaos of a landing and later recalled that by sunset the 2 battalions had dug in, forming a crescent-shaped beachhead about 3,000 yards wide on the water and projecting roughly 1,500 yards inland to await the night's enemy moves. The 4th Division Reserve, the 23rd Marines, suffered most from delays that day, held on LSTs for hours. They were finally ordered into landing craft and did not reach the shore. Until about 2 p.m. Colonel Lewis R. Jones, the regimental commander, endured serious communications failures and his LVT broke down, so it took him and his crew some 7 hours to get ashore. Otherwise the assault progressed. Roughly 48 medium Sherman tanks, 15 flamethrowing tanks, about 24 half-tracks mounting 75mm guns. For artillery battalions and over 15,000 Marines were committed to the beaches. The beachhead extended nearly a mile inland, though some battalions missed their first-day objectives. Marine losses for the day were comparatively light, about 15 killed and 225 wounded, against roughly 438 Japanese killed, which one historian judged a reasonably successful opening day. Tactics settled the island into sectors. The 1st Battalion, 8th Marines supported the 24th on the northern arc of the crescent, while the 25th and a battalion of the 23rd held the southern side. Engineer and special troops and artillery units from the 10th and 14th Marines stood ready in rear areas. American commanders knew the Japanese would fight tenaciously, and after dark, the defenders prepared to counterattack. Cut off by American bombing, Ogata ordered each unit to counterattack locally if needed, and to strike hard at any beachhead before reinforcements could move across the island, an order that reflected the desperate situation his men faced but also their determination to die fighting and make the Emperor proud. Shortly after 10:30 p.m., the Japanese mobile counterattack force, a roughly 900-man battalion from the 135th Infantry, probed the center of the Marine line opposite the dug-in 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 24th, armed with rifles and explosive charges. Marines brought up supporting fires as the enemy closed. One battalion commander later reported that a gully running into the western edge of their area became an obvious channel for the assault. Sometime near midnight, elements struck around K Company, even hauling 275mm howitzers into position by hand and then firing them with devastating effect. In that sector, perhaps 150 to 200 Japanese pushed through toward the beach. An artillery and machine gun fire ripped into the rear areas as fighting raged within 75 yards of some positions. Lieutenant Mickey McGuire used his 37mm gun with canister for close-in defense, and Marines such as PFC Alfred J. Daigle and machine gunner Orville H. Showers held their fire until the enemy closed within about 100 yards, then opened up. Their action cut down large numbers of attackers, but the 2 were found dead at their weapons the next morning, and scores of Japanese bodies lay before their position. Daigle was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously, and Showers received the Silver Star. 2 tank companies under Major Robert R. Neiman arrived just before dawn and were rushed into positions supporting companies K and L. After a short period, Neiman reported that the battlefield needed undertakers more than tanks because of the enormous number of enemy dead. Accounts credit the .50 caliber machine guns of batteries E and F and the 75mm pack howitzers of battery D. 14th Marines, with shredding, attacking troops. The Japanese assaults inflicted and suffered heavy losses. One estimate puts Japanese casualties in the counterattacks at roughly 600. In a separate left flank action around 2 a.m., some 600 Special Naval Landing Force troops from the Yushi Point airfields struck the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. Company A was mauled and reduced to only about 30 riflemen still fit to fight. Had to bolster its ranks with engineers, corpsmen, signalmen, and shore party personnel to hold the line. Bright parachute flares lit the scene, and the Marines poured everything they had: mortar, rifles, machine guns, and 37mm canister rounds into the attackers until the fighting only finally subsided with the arrival at dawn of Sherman tanks from the 4th Tank Battalion that cleared the ground. Most of the roughly 476 Japanese bodies were found sprawled in front of Company A's position when daylight came, and many defenders, seeing the fight lost, killed themselves with grenades. With only a dozen tanks on the island, the Japanese committed about half of them in a 3:30 a.m. assault on the 25th. They were caught in a murderous storm of marine artillery, anti-tank weapons, bazookas, machine guns, and rifle fire, and were quickly reduced to burning hulks. A correspondent described the lead vehicle's fate. One careened into a ditch and burst into flames. A second limped on and then stopped after firing. A third was surrounded and blown apart. A fourth had its driver killed by a direct bazooka hit and its crew abandoned the turret. A fifth was set ablaze and its crew lost, while a sixth managed to flee, even without their armored support. Elements of the Japanese 50th Regiment repeatedly pressed the 23rd Marines but were shattered by 37mm canister and other defensive fires, and sporadic, small-scale charges at Marine positions were repeatedly repulsed. By dawn on July 25, fewer than 100 Marines were reported killed or wounded while about 1,241 Japanese lay on the field, with perhaps hundreds more carried off by their comrades. In barely the second day after the landings, the Japanese organized resistance was largely broken. Colonel Ogata's control collapsed as bombing severed his communications. Securing the island became largely a matter of time, though isolated groups continued to launch night sorties during the next week before, gradually melting away as their avenues of retreat disappeared. The two Marine divisions pushed steadily south from White Beaches 1 and 2, methodically destroying enemy strongpoints, forcing defenders ahead of them and digging in whenever infiltrators or suicidal banzai attacks threatened the line. Intelligence officer Goodham McCormick warned commanders that a heavier coordinated counterstroke might still come, and Lieutenant Colonel William W. Buchanan said the troops used the same approach employed on Saipan. Instead of driving down main roads, they swept the ground in close, linear formations like beaters, flushing game-clearing every position as they advanced. The tactic proved effective, though it was hazardous. Mines, booby traps, snipers, sudden jungle ambushes, and relentless heat, humidity, and monsoon rains exhausted the men. The 2nd Marine Division, under Major General Watson, joined them up, seized the northern Yushi Point airstrips on July 26 and made them serviceable for U.S. Army P-47 Thunderbolts within 2 days. Ogata and his staff abandoned their Mount Lasso command post when 4th Division troops climbed Mount Maga on the 26th. Mount Lasso was taken with almost no opposition. Beginning July 27th, the two divisions advanced abreast across the island. Opposition and casualties were light, and the 4th Tank Battalion captured the Gergen Point airstrip the next day. Urging haste, one senior officer told his men they would be back on Maui soon, pointing to the waiting ships as commanders canceled some preparatory shore bombardments to conserve dwindling ammunition rather than expend rounds on ground the enemy had already vacated. By dusk of July 29th, Marines held roughly the northern half of Tinian, though stiffer resistance appeared as they neared Tinian town amid sheets of heavy rain and an enemy probe against the 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, that was quickly driven off despite mortars and artillery harassment. Colonel Franklin A. Hart's 24th Marines, backed by divisional artillery and ships offshore, were assigned to take the town. After supporting fires lifted, the 24th's 1st Battalion pushed in, but ran into intense fire from caves on the town's north shore. Flame tanks neutralized the defenders and engineers used demolition to seal cave mouths. Shortly after 1400, on July 30th, the 24th entered a largely wrecked, nearly deserted Tinian town and found a lone Zero parked on the broken coral runway. About the same time, the 25th captured Airfield No. 4 on the town's eastern edge after clearing scattered small arms resistance. Units from 1/8 and the 23rd relieved the 24th that evening. The 2nd Marines then drove east, cornered an enemy detachment in a massive cave complex, destroyed for machine gun positions, and killed 89 defenders with the help of a flame-throwing tank. By 1830, their missions for the day were complete, and U.S. forces controlled roughly 80% of the island. Asterisk, late on July 30th, Major General Schmidt ordered the final push, drive to the southeast coast, crush the last enemy pockets, and annihilate any remaining resistance. Some 500 men of the 56th Naval Guard Force and up to 1,800 soldiers of the 50th Infantry Regiment were believed holed up in caves and cliff strongpoints on a southeastern plateau, prepared to fight to the death. To soften those positions, the Marines pounded enemy lines all night on July 30th to 31st, with every available gun on Tinian plus heavy coast artillery from southern Saipan. And on the morning of the assault cruisers Louisville, Mellier, and Birmingham joined the battleships Tennessee and California in about a 75-minute naval bombardment. The pause let 126 P-47s, B-29s, and carrier-based TBF Avengers mount a 40-minute strike on enemy positions, unloading about 69 tons of explosives before offshore gunfire resumed for another 35 minutes. Through the night, 14th Marine gunners fired roughly 2,000 rounds and the 10th Marines about 5,000 rounds, a barrage one observer later called almost unbearable. Japanese defenses presented a near-ideal posture, Concentrated mortars and fire greeted Marines climbing the steep slopes. Tanks could not cross the trackless inclines and struggled through minefields and thick undergrowth. An armored landing craft had to suppress hostile fire along the beach. Around 10 in the morning, a company-sized Japanese beach unit launched a suicidal charge against 1st Battalion, 24th Marines, and was annihilated. The 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, ran into stubborn resistance, including a concealed heavy gun that Sherman tanks quickly knocked out. A hidden concrete emplacement containing 20 defenders was destroyed. And in another sector, a crippled Sherman was seized by the Japanese and used as an armored machine gun position until another American tank silenced it. As additional battalions closed in and began to scale the slopes, elements of 123rd and a company of 223rds reached the plateau late in the afternoon. The 1st Battalion, 8th Marines followed, and other 2nd Battalion elements joined them, and they held the high ground overnight. Captain Carl W. Hoffman later recalled there was not enough daylight left to properly wire the position. Cut fields of fire and interlocked machine gun arcs the normal tasks of preparing a stout defense. Japanese probes began at dusk, and by night small groups infiltrated positions in the pitch-black darkness, putting everyone on edge. Though seasoned troops avoided tragic friendly fire incidents, enemy pressure intensified until a full banzai assault came against a 37 mm post, the attackers advancing in waves against canister fire. The gun piled up attackers by the score, and, with supporting fire, the Marines had broken the assault by morning, leaving hundreds of dead around their lines. To steadiest men, Captain Hoffman, who carried a trumpet played tunes on his horn during the lull. At one point, a lone Japanese soldier charged straight for the wire and toward the musicians, only to be cut down by concentrated rifle fire before he could throw his grenade. Hoffman later joked that the man clearly did not appreciate his music, and the little concert continued. Japanese attacks persisted over the next 2 days and did cause some American casualties, but the counterattacks were methodically beaten down. Major General Schmidt formally declared Tinian secure at 6:55 p.m. on August 1st. The same day, Colonel Ogata took his own life, though a number of Japanese reservists either did not hear the announcement or continued to fight. Isolated enemy bands kept up sporadic attacks or remained hidden for months afterward. In fact, the last holdout Murata Susumu was not discovered until 1953. Living as a civilian employee of NKK, the island's major sugar firm, rather than as an active soldier. Civilians had also sheltered in caves. Perhaps as many as 1,000 people land only gradually emerged, uncertain of their fate. Civilian deaths on Tinian are estimated at over 4,000. Marines had already seen desperate suicides on nearby Saipan, and although mass suicides on Tinian were rarer, a few civilians who wandered into Marine positions at night were accidentally shot, and retreating Japanese sometimes strapped explosives to civilians or drove people off cliffs. On August 14th, Major General Clifton's entire 4th Marine Division put to sea for its Maui base, keeping the pledge their commander had made. The division had suffered heavy casualties in the campaign, including 212 killed during the Tinian operation. The 2nd Marine Division remained in the Mary News, with about 105 dead and 655 wounded, and would stay in theater until the war's end. Fewer than 400 of the roughly 9,000 Japanese defenders were taken prisoner. Nearly all the rest were slain. Admiral Spruance called the landing of some 42,000 men and their equipment across the narrow white beaches one of the most brilliantly conceived and executed amphibious operations of the war. And Holland Smith later termed it the perfect amphibious operation, an outcome owed in large part to the work of the Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion. With Tinian secure, the Marianas gave the Army Air Forces the forward bases they needed to strike the Japanese home islands, about 1,200 nautical miles from Japan. Tinian lay well within the B29's roughly 2,800-mile range. 2 wings of the 20th Air Force were assigned there, and B29s began striking the Japanese mainland about 3 months after the island fell. According to Air Force figures, B29s flew some 29,000 sorties from the Marianas in the following year, dropping about 157,000 tons of bombs. Japanese estimates credited those attacks with roughly 26,000 dead. About 92,000 people left homeless, and the destruction or burning of on the order of 21,000 dwellings. Enola Gay's takeoff on August 6, 1945, secured Tinian place in military history when it carried the first atomic bomb to Hiroshima. 2 days later, a second atomic weapon struck Nagasaki and Japan surrendered soon afterward. When word of surrender reached the 2nd Marine Division, men who had thought about the grim coasts of Japan and the tasks that lay ahead instead